Hello, my name is Vanessa. Welcome back to my channel. Today I want to do something a little bit different. I was hesitant to make a video like this so early on into making videos, but I was really wanting to talk about enemies to lovers. It's just like my initial thoughts on everything. I did write a couple notes here if you ever see me looking to the side. This is more kind of like impromptu. Like I just wanted to discuss it and like open up a floor for discussion about enemies to lovers, which is my personal favorite romance trope. Even if that's like super cliche to say, it just is. It's just the truth. I just don't think I'm exaggerating when I say this might be the most popular like romance trope at the minute. If you go into the hashtag enemies to lovers tag on TikTok, you'll find like hundreds of thousands of videos and like thousands are being posted daily. This is like kind of a very buzzy word at the minute. So there's real like grit here to get into, and I just wanted to dive into that. So why do we love it so much? Why is it good for storytelling? When is it successful? And is there a line when it comes to enemies to lovers? I kind of want to touch on all of that, so let's just jump in. For starters, like why do we love it so much? This is what I mostly wanted to talk about. Like why do I like this so much? I was just pondering this a lot, and I think it comes down to quite a few different things. So some of the things I've seen thrown around a lot, which I do agree with, is like for one, the intense tension is really great because in the narrative it does create a huge sense of drama, and I think that's why people say it doesn't work in contemporary settings, and that why it works better like in like fantasy or historical fiction, because a lot of times this sort of like intensity that people are talking about requires like deep trauma or really high stakes and very intense emotions that have very tangible consequences, and something like an office romance just isn't going to provide that. Unlikely pairings. I think that a lot of people are just very intrigued in fiction to see two different people come together in a satisfying way that like in our real life we don't get to see this as often. We are like socially conditioned to kind of segregate to our own parts of society, and of course like you can always overcome this and become friends with people that are totally different from you, but I do think like usually in an enemies to lovers situation they come from such different places but have like little threads of things that pull them together in the way that a lot of people do, but we are a lot more reluctant in real life to explore that. And it does take like a tangible skill in order to reach out to people from like across like different like social stratifications. It just is something that we just don't get to witness a lot, and I think that that unlikely pairing thing is really intriguing for people narratively, and so I totally get that. Now I personally am really drawn to any type of unlikely pairing. It's true for enemies to lovers, but I think that's also true for like grumpy sunshine, and I think grumpy sunshine is even fun if like the woman is grumpy and the man is the sunshine. That's just one example of that kind of intrigue in a different type of trope, but I think that that's a huge thing. I think that that really adds to like the texture of it. It's not impossible, it's just a little bit more uncommon, so it just makes it more interesting. Another thing I see a lot is people saying that what they like about enemies to lovers is it shows two people who can love each other beyond their flaws. Like as if someone can see all of your flaws, all of your ugliness, all of your nastiness, and still make a decision to love you or still come to love you in some way. And I think that like in terms of storytelling, in terms of narrative, this is a really good point. And I do think that that in of itself, just that journey to get to that place with someone is in of itself a good plot. So I do see the allure of that in particular as well. And I agree that's something that I really like witnessing when I am looking at enemies to lovers. Like I think traditionally a lot of people think of romance stories in a traditional sense like from the 50s or something like Cinderella, where she's a polite, perfect, pretty princess. He's this polite, perfect, charming prince. They're both equally super attractive, and true love is kind of just written in the stars for them. They love each other at first sight, and we're not really given much reason beyond these two are meant to be for them to be together. It just feels very like unearned in a way, and I think people are getting increasingly more fed up with that type of storytelling. I know people like destined mates. I really don't like fated mates trope because I think that it's unearned. Like you can't go from being mortal enemies because his father actively killed your parents and he's still carrying out his mission, to just being like la la, like he's attractive and I'm in love now, even though some books are attempting to do that. That is not like an emotionally satisfying story as much as like, wow, that's gonna be really hard to overcome. There's an element of surprise of like, what can this author do to make us kind of get to that point that keeps you reading and keeps you turning the page? And I agree with that. Enemies to begrudging allies, to mutual concern, to questioning allegiances, to extreme concern, to accepting friendship, to you're the only person I can do this with, to you're the only person I see myself in, to I can't do any of this without you, to you see all my flaws and you still want me anyway, to lovers. That is a narrative. Like that is a structure of a narrative in its own way. Like a major part of this is just like the earned of it all. Like it's so earned. The concept of someone being able to see your nastiness and your ugliness and still making an active decision to go beyond that and love you at your core is something that as humans, we all have this like implicit fear of. Like this implicit fear of like, if I'm too earnest, if I'm too genuine, like something might slip past the cracks that's ugly. And how can anyone actually love me for who I am? Like I'm just inherently unlovable, which is not true at all. And I think being able to experience that through an enemies to lovers dynamic is very cathartic for us as readers, because a lot of people do really feel that way. Like there is an embarrassment, there is a shame of being fully known, and I think enemies to lovers lets us explore that in a safe way. Of course, like I think that that's very fair, and I think that that's a very charming, very interesting kind of psyche to explore. Another element of that as well, like going along with that, is that in enemies to lovers, like I said, it has to be earned, but it's also like the act of choosing someone. Like the enemies choose to show up for each other even if they have like these allegiances that they're like questioning at the minute. Like they choose to show up for each other even though they've seen each other's flaws. Like they choose to love this person despite everything that is keeping them apart. It just gives you something like tangible about this romantic love. Like a lot of times, like I don't really like in romance where the romance is all centered around like, I love this person because of how they make me feel. Like you make me feel so good. You make me feel in love. That doesn't mean much to me. Like as a woman in my personal relationship with my boyfriend, I want to know why he loves me independent of how I make him feel in this relationship. Like what is it about me as a person, as Vanessa, that you love? And I think in enemies to lovers, a lot of times you're more likely to kind of explore that in this dynamic, because like they're not really serving each other much of the time. In fact, they're working against each other, and then they still find things about the other that they really respect and appreciate and learn to fall in love with. And so it does feel like it's more of an action of loving as opposed to like a love that just washes over you because like it's fated in the stars, like your fated mates. It's earned. Like they have to actively like each other. They have to actively love each other. And so you have to like learn to like each other before you love each other. And that's something that is skipped over a lot in a lot of romance. And I don't think that's realistic of an expectation to set for romance in general in real life either. So I do think that that's like a positive of this trope, is that's like a really interesting thing to explore. I also think that just narratively as well, two sides of the same coin, which is this kind of sub-trope that happens within the enemies to lovers trope, is really interesting. I think that as humans, we really like symmetry. We really like symmetry in storytelling. We like symmetry in nature, and something about two people who are on opposing sides of like a political landscape or something like that in a fantasy world, coming from a similar experience and getting to the root of each other's soul and seeing that they're like fundamentally the same despite what they perceive to be differences, feels very like connecting with a sense of yin and yang in nature that I think as humans, as a part of this universe, we are kind of seeking at all times. So I feel like that's part of the reason why it feels so satisfying in a narrative to see that. I just think that we seek that symmetry a lot, and so seeing two sides of the same coin, it plays out in enemies to lovers, but that could also be platonic as well. And I think that those relationships are always really interesting to explore in media. I personally always really like that sort of exploration. After all, hate and love are also two sides of the same coin. They're on polar opposites of the same coin, but it's like a tightrope that you're walking in enemies to lovers between hate and love that are very, again, yin and yang. And so it's fun to watch an author walk that tightrope with this couple safely, where like, you know, things are gonna work out, but you don't get to really see things play out safely in real life in the way that like you can in fiction. So I do think like two sides of the same coins applies to hate and love as well, and that's what makes enemies to lovers interesting when it comes to that subtrope. I'm losing daylight, so the lighting is gonna get super weird in here, so I apologize for that. But why enemies to lovers make brain happy? I do think that there is a chemical aspect to why people like enemies to lovers so much, and I just wanna break it down because I think it's really, really interesting, and I can feel like my brain doing this when I read or watch this trope. So if like you're wondering why watching a scene where two characters are getting all up in each other's faces really angrily kind of triggers a very similar emotional feeling as like watching two characters about to passionately make out. There's a real reason for that. The brain is such a weird thing. And the truth is that the brain doesn't really distinguish super well the difference between like anger and like passion and love. So I'm looking here, I have notes. I found an article from The Guardian that discusses scientists' findings that although love and hate are like polar opposites, our nervous system isn't super good at distinguishing between the two, and a lot of the symptoms that we have when we're feeling hatred and when we're feeling love or desire are actually like very similar. So this is like a quote from that. They found that the hate circuit includes parts of the brain called the putamen and the insula, found in the subcortex of the organ. The putamen is already known to be involved in the perception of contempt and disgust, and may also be part of the motor system involved in movement and action. Significantly, the putamen and the insula are also both activated by romantic love. This is not surprising. The putamen could also be involved in the preparation of aggressive acts in romantic contexts, as in situations when a rival presents a danger. Increased heart rate, difficulty breathing, difficulty concentrating, maybe sweaty palms, shaking, obsessive thoughts. Do those sound familiar? The symptoms also present when we're attracted to someone, so it's very easy to see how our brain's wires are just getting really easily crossed here. I do want to make a very, very, very important disclaimer, because I don't think that if you are feeling fear for someone, that also means you're attracted to them by default. No, no, no. That article in The Guardian also goes into how there's a very important difference in discernment. Our conscious judgment zone in our brain is thinking way different things during those times. So if you consciously dislike someone for very valid, justified reasons, your brain isn't just gonna suddenly forget that. Though in that article it does mention if you love someone, you are more likely to kind of shut down your judgment zones in favor of seeing this person in the best way possible. So that is really interesting. I just want to make a disclaimer there. But I mean, in fiction, when we are kind of experiencing enemies to lovers and we're at that beginning stage where they're kind of like in fear or in disgust, and we're witnessing that kind of unfold, it's easy to see how it is fun for our brains to play with like those different chemicals and how it's like making us feel similar to the way that we might be attracted to someone, even though we consciously know like we're currently at odds with this person. The brain uses more discernment in real life. I just think it's fun that our brains are kind of play with these wire crossings in a fictional situation with enemies to lovers. I think that it's interesting that we kind of pull out of that subconscious feeling we get from hatred and love in order to make this narrative more interesting. Like, I think that's just interesting. But your brain does discern. I just want to make that very clear. And like, if you apply this to a fictional relationship, like in enemies to lovers, we are usually working with a couple, typically like if it's a male or and a female. And the main male character is like very attractive. Like, he's objectively attractive. Maybe he's like super tall, he has like fluffy hair, and he has this like annoying grin with this great dimple that's like uncharacteristically boyish or something like that, that like our main character just fixates on. So they are objectively usually like can notice their attraction to this person, but they think at first like it must just be my hatred taking over and surely not me actually being attracted to this person. Sure, he's attractive, but I don't think that because I hate him. Like, I think that that's just really fun to play with, and I think that it's clear in fiction we've already established that these people are usually pretty attractive anyway. Okay, I wrote like straight up a fanfic when I was thinking about what this would play out in fiction for like how I kind of like it when it's presented. Okay, and I think that I'm not gonna like say it off the cuff as well as I did when I wrote it. He's tall, he's got an uncharacteristically charming boyish smile, and his hair is curly or whatever. His gaze is piercing, and you are both fixated on each other because of whatever like external or internal conflict that's keeping you apart, right? And our main FMC is trying to ignore his attractiveness, but her brain doesn't know if her body is reacting to how attractive he is or if it's just her hatred for him overcoming her, right? She doesn't know either. It's infuriating her. She feels like she's losing her footing. She feels like she's losing her composure over this. She can't stop fixating on him. But every time she thinks about him, instead of that overwhelming hate, it's replaced by a photo of his face and the way that his dimple appears when he smirks at her, and how it's so uncharacteristic for such a putrid man. She needs needs to get the upper hand back. She does not want to submit to a confused attraction for him. I think about him so much because I despise him, she says to herself. But every time she thinks of him, she thinks of that boyish smile and that darn dimple. But she has to avenge her family. He's the reason for all of my pain, she says to herself. But in doing this and admitting this, she is giving him a huge space in a part of her brain. Now there's an entire room of her soul that is reserved solely for him, and she tries to say that it's anger, but all she does is dwell on the painful memories of him and what he's done, and it's starting to feel like obsession. Surely not romantic, she says to herself, but isn't it okay if I want him to want me? Isn't it in some way wanting him to want me gives me the upper hand? If I make him lose his composure, does that make me the victor? This is how she tries to rationalize this to herself, right? But really, it's her heart betraying her because her body doesn't know the difference. Dude, can someone write what I just said? Can someone, or if that's already written, which it must be, can someone please recommend that book to me right now? I think like distinctly in the Jasad Air, she does describe her attraction to him like that saying to herself, if I want him to want me, that's me getting the upper hand back. I actually think that's a really, really interesting way of describing it, but I also think like that sort of train of thought, again, in of itself is its own plot, but also shows the way that our body is betraying us when those wires get crossed between hatred and love. And there is a chemical reason for this fixation on hatred. We do know now that anger and rage are addictive in a sense, and it can become like a vicious cycle because there is like a pleasurable function when we feel anger and rage. Your neural pathways essentially like trigger your reward system every time you feel angry, and that's why like you can even see it in yourself sometimes. Like, why? I want to stop being angry about this. I think I'm in the wrong, and for some reason I just can't stop feeling like I want to continue being angry. It's because there is a part of it that does feel pleasurable because it is playing with those receptors and kind of rewarding you for being mad. And releasing serotonin is something our body does like when we eat, for example, or like in worst cases when we gamble, or notably when we have sex. Just saying. And then in Enemies to Lovers, we get to see how this kind of vicious cycle of like pleasurable impulses with anger turns into like obsessive thoughts, or like a vicious cycle of thinking about someone over and over and over again and becoming fixated on them, which can start to feel a whole lot like attraction, especially if this person's already objectively attractive. Okay, so I say all of that because that's fun in fiction, but I just want to say really clearly, it's really important to be actually aware of this in real life, and learning that your brain is rewarding you for being mad actually really helped me to learn to regulate my nervous system as soon as I clock that that's happening, because it can be an addictive thing that ends up destroying relationships in your life for no good reason, because your brain is fooling you into thinking you need to stay mad. It's rewarding you for that. But it is really interesting to see authors use this, like our implicit knowledge of this glitchy chemical function in our brains to portray enemies to lovers in books, and to let us like play in a sandbox that is safe and contained for this like love-hate kind of chemical dynamic to take place in. I don't think that rage in real life is this noble emotion. I don't think it should be given such a high pedestal. I think that a lot of times, especially with men, it's like the one emotion that we let men feel for some reason. And I think that that's really dangerous territory. And I think that it puts women in particular in danger when so many men have normalized rage and say like, this is a masculine emotion, I'm allowed to do this. It shouldn't be an emotion that is like lacks any shame and that you're able to like just subject people to because it's like the only masculine emotion. I think that that's just a really dangerous kind of territory to be on. And I do think that like part of that is why enemies to lovers can get a little bit iffy sometimes. But I just want to put that disclaimer out there, like rage is an emotion that we should be aware of, and I'm not saying like to deny your emotions, but also that it can put other people in your presence in danger, and that it needs to be reeled in. But I also think that fiction sometimes gives us a safe space to expound our morbid curiosities about relationships, about rage and hatred, you know, without fear of getting hurt in real life. And I don't think that we should just like take away that platform because sometimes it's uncomfortable. I think that it's meant to be a safe space to explore that, and I do think that there are levels to it, so I'm not dismissing that. I was thinking about doing a whole video on dark romance, but I'm gonna save it for when my thoughts are a little bit more fleshed out on it. Like I have other morbid curiosities that I also explore in fiction, like murder and assassination and death and all of these different things that I safely explore in fiction that I don't want near me at all in real life. Like, I don't actually actively want to be in this like forced proximity relationship with someone I hate in real life, but I do think like it scratches an itch in my brain to be able to safely experience that in fiction. Hugely important to use your discernment between fiction and reality, and I fear like if critical thinking skills are going in the gutter as of lately, we're gonna see more of an issue in this sort of portrayal if people don't like wisen up about things like this. But you need to keep your wits about you, is all I'll say. So leading on to that, I also have a question, which is there a line? Like, is there a line that we shouldn't be crossing when it comes to enemies to lovers? Because as much as I love this trope, there are certain instances of enemies to lovers where I'm like, I don't know if I agree that that is an appropriate portrayal of things. I'm wondering if it's just individual or if there should be a line for everyone. I don't know. And one thing with talking about enemies to lovers, I think a lot of times this is very heteronormative, so I'm talking about straight enemies to lovers in particular. There tends to be very patriarchal tones, and I just want to put this out there. A lot of times in enemies to lovers, we have a masculine character who is in this position of power. Maybe he's like a brutal emperor, or he is like this marshal who is super authoritative, and he's usually quite tall, he's usually a big presence, he's super strong, and that's always harped upon in a major way. Meanwhile, our female character a lot of times is very small. Sometimes she's like wayfish, and usually she's like a serf, and she's a nobody, and she prevails anyway, which is great. Like, she might also be a strong character. She's usually inherently placed below our main male character in this power structure. That's just something that we see a lot in this type of content. And I'm not saying that there's anything inherently wrong with that, but that does play into patriarchal stereotypes about like men having these positions of power and being able to abuse that status in order to, you know, sexually harm or corral women in a way that like they don't want. And I just want to be like us to be aware of that is something that like we do see play out in real life, and it's not like this dreamy fairy tale where he's really hot and everything works out for good in real life. And I just want people to use their discernment here, that if you're experiencing predatory behavior from someone in a position above you, that action needs to be taken there, because this is not a fiction book. In fiction though, like I said, it is a safe space to play with ideas about that, but I do recognize that a lot of like romantasy books, a lot of enemies to lovers books tend to use those patriarchal tones to inform the power structure between these two characters, and it's just something that needs to be mentioned and something that needs to be acknowledged. I'm not saying get rid of it, because there are actually stories like that I do like, and I still do like those couples, and I think it's interesting at times, but I'm coming from a place where I was raised by very empathetic men who treated women wonderfully. I am in a super healthy relationship of 8 years with a man who treats me as an equal. We are on equal footing on every single way, and I think I have a really good idea of what a healthy relationship with a man does look like, or at least be able to recognize like, whoa, I think I'm letting my enjoyment of these fictional books impact the relationship I have with men in my real life, or impact the sort of things I'm allowing men to get away with in their relationship with me. So, you know, it's just about like being a critical thinker in these scenarios, and also like respecting your own boundaries and your own safety in real life if you are a consumer of these sorts of books. I'm not saying get rid of it entirely or it's inherently problematic. I just think like it should be discussed when it comes up, so people are aware. Like, if you find yourself only wanting to read books like this, maybe questioning like, why is that? Because that is something I see happen a lot in enemies to lovers. I would be, I think, neglectful if I didn't mention it. I think that that's something that I wanted to talk about. I wanted to make a video about smut in particular, and like spicy talk and everything like that. I'm kind of scared to make it though, because I was hoping that like someone else would make that video and I could just like quietly co-sign on it, but I'm not seeing anyone have the take that I have, and I'm a bit fearful, but I do have an opinion on it. So if you want to see that, let me know. I'm trying to be very fair about smut in books though. I'm not going to talk about it here though. I'm just going to talk about enemies to lovers here. So knowing that there are patriarchal tones and there are implicit power imbalances and a lot of times in these couples, is there a line that should not be crossed universally? I want to talk about Tillie Cole for a sec. Tillie Cole is a British, white, author, and she wrote a book called Darkness Embraced, which is an enemies to lovers dark romance book about a Latina woman who is the daughter of this like cartel boss in Mexico who falls in love with the heir question mark of the Ku Klux Klan, like a Ku Klux Klan division, which is really hard to say for me with someone with Invisalign. This is past my line. I don't think that there's anything about this that I can defend. It's a line when we start talking about real world politics that actively are hurting people today. In real life, I cannot suspend my disbelief for that sort of positioning. Like the Ku Klux Klan to this day, their roots in our government at the very minute we are speaking are having harmful effects on specifically Mexican women actually in our country right now as we speak. People are dead. People have died because of this exact group of people, because of this racism. And I don't think that there's any excuse to romanticize something like this when, especially when we see how it's, instead of it being like this shadowy backdrop of America, it's becoming mainstream now. It's like, we are not in a position where we should be normalized things like this right now. And especially from a British woman who doesn't understand American racism the way that I think that she thinks she does, especially as from a white woman who has no place writing from the perspective of a Mexican woman like that. I just think there's just no excuse for something like that. That is romanticizing toxicity in a way that is so degrading and is so dangerous that it's just gross. It's not enemies to lovers, it's just gross. So that is beyond my line because of the politics of it impacting our real world in the present day, and real people have been affected by that type of racism. But then again, everything is political. So if I'm coming out that book for being about real life politics, it's hard for me to say that like all fantasy books are just divorced from real life politics when a lot of them are at least loosely based on, you know, political structures across our world or historically as well in the real world. Even if it is in like a fake kingdom, it's still based on structures that exist. For example, Blood Over Brighthaven is obviously like you can take it to mean, for me as an American, when I was thinking about it, I was thinking about you know, American colonizers and indigenous people in America. So is there a problem with Sayona and Tamal's relationship dynamic in that book then, since it is pretty blatantly about real world politics and real world colonization? Like, I don't know. When I was reading that book, I did have like a gut instinct to be like, ooh, I don't know. Like, I don't know about that. And at the same time though, it was like duplicitous, because at the same time, it was like, I also liked their relationship building because it was a satisfying narrative. Like, it felt good narratively and it was emotionally very fulfilling, but because of how blatant to me the themes were and how much they mirrored our real world, there was a part of me that was shying away from that relationship and feeling a bit uncomfortable. And in cases like that, like, should it not have been written then? I don't know. Like, I don't know if was it okay to be written? I think that it's very fair when I saw criticisms of this book from people saying like, yeah, that Sayona Tamal relationship just really turned me off to this otherwise really well written book. I think that's a very fair criticism to have, you know? And like, is it permissible just because it's interesting? Is it because it is still in a high fantasy world we're far enough removed that it's okay? I don't know. I just have a lot of questions about it, and I think that Blood Over Brighthaven brought a lot to mind about it. I don't really have an answer for you. I think things get very murky very fast, especially in like romantasy with this. And one thing, like, I really like Just Saw It Air, and in Just Saw It Air, one of the criticisms is like, could this be a colonizer romance? Like, and I really do see what people mean when they say that. Like, it could be classed as a colonizer romance, and I did really like that story and I liked that couple. So I don't know, things get really murky here, and something tells me that I'm not going to be the person that's going to be of great authority when it comes to this discussion, but I just thought again that it would be kind of remiss if I didn't mention this aspect of enemies to lovers, because it is like a very prominent element of things, since we do want the stakes to be high, we do want them to be on opposing sides, but it can very quickly teeter into like colonizer territory or, you know, imperialism territory very fast, and that is something that we do struggle with in our real world. So I don't know. I don't know, like, where is the line in cases like this? I don't think I'm gonna be the authority. Like I said, I don't think I'm gonna be the authority. I think I'm just uncovering a lot of these issues myself. I'm still pondering all of this. I think that there's a lot of nuance. I do think that, like, for the most part, people are gonna have different lines. There are people who love the relationship in Blood Over Brighthaven, and there are people who absolutely hated it, and both could have their reasons for that. I'm just curious about that. I just wanted to bring it up because I think it's really interesting, and it's becoming like increasingly relevant as more of these stories come out, since a lot of them are based in politics. Do you have a line, and where is it? And is it case by case? I don't know. Let me know. What do you think about that? I don't have an answer. I really don't. I just wanted to like present that because I think it's really relevant. Okay, sorry, my camera died again. Ignore that. So when is enemies to lovers successful? So as I've been mentioning over the course of this video, I think a huge allure of enemies to lovers is the amount of effort that takes place to get the enemies from enemies to lovers. And all of that effort and all of that time and all of that development ends up becoming its own plot in its own right, which is really rewarding. And one thing that like, okay, I'm not saying all, this is just me, Vanessa, speaking from my heart right now about my own anecdotal experience reading from a lot of male authors. And I do read male authors, and I do like books written by men, and I think there are very emotionally captivating books written by men with good romantic subplots. I'm not saying that at all for what I'm about to say. But I do notice, if I pick up, for example, a high fantasy book written by a man, it's less likely I'm picking it up because I think the romantic subplot will be good. Because oftentimes with romantic subplots in books written by male authors, not always, but just in my experience, it feels like the romantic plot line or the romantic couple only exists kind of like as an object that is used for a grander conflict. Like it's very couple versus world as opposed to like character versus character, which is what you get in enemies to lovers, which is what makes their dynamic a plot in and of itself. Whereas like I feel like in a lot of books written by men that I've read personally, there is a romantic couple, but the pairing is at odds with like some external force as opposed to like being at odds with each other. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that either. It's just not exactly something that scratches an itch in my brain. I don't think that it kind of like delves into the human psyche that much. It serves a purpose for whatever plot is going on in that high fantasy world. But the character versus character conflict of enemies to lovers is in of itself like its own type of storytelling that I personally just really like, and I'm more drawn to, I gravitate toward more. So it's something I noticed, like I have one book in mind for this. I'm thinking about The Will of the Many because I read it recently. Like in that there is a romantic subplot, but it's like very minimal, and it's very just like that romantic relationship is a reason for the main male character to like progress his own personal development instead of like them coming together as a couple independently. It's like more about his growth as the main male character, and she's kind of like an object of that journey as opposed to like their relationship being really integral in its own like story. And that is an example of a book that I really did enjoy. I think that like it wasn't necessary to have that sort of plot. I just think that it would have taken it to another level I would have enjoyed. But you know, I think that like the target demographic for a book like The Will of the Many isn't like me. So I think that that's okay that it didn't exist there, and I still liked it just fine. But like that's an example of like a lot of subplots that I do tend to see where it's like, huh, yeah, like it's a couple, but it's not like its own story. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I'm just like putting it out there. I just noticed like female authors are more likely to write this type of storytelling that I'm personally more drawn to. But, and I know that we all know that like romantasy in particular is kind of this cash grab genre right now, and we're seeing contemporary romance writers who might be used to certain writing conventions coming into high fantasy and playing with enemies to lovers, since it is a very buzzy word at the minute. And there's something that's lacking substance in a lot of these books right now. I think that what's lacking is, like I mentioned in Will of the Many, or with a book where like it's couple versus the world, it's very external conflict. I'm not expecting an in-depth relationship. Like it's not presented to me like I need to expect that. But if you present something to me and you say this is enemies to lovers, I am expecting that development and that internal conflict between those two characters as they're developing their relationship to hold its own, to stand on 2 feet as a subplot, and I don't think that a lot of authors these days who are coming out with these very quickly written romantasy books are taking in the time to actually like create that. They're more just like, all right, how can we get as fast as possible to the smut scenes that are going to be talked about on TikTok in this short form content? And it's kind of like a grander issue with influencer marketing and book talk marketing, and I have a whole other video about that I want to make, but I think that that's like a symptom of it. And so we're seeing people kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater in favor of like cutting straight to those like tropey, smutty, spicy romance scenes instead of really developing out and making a really fleshy enemies to lovers plotline. That's what makes it feel so unearned, because a lot of times we cut straight from the enemies part to attraction and lust, and then that goes straight into love. And I just want like more of a logical progression of things. I think it's okay to acknowledge attractiveness, especially like I said with all the chemical stuff going on inside your brain, but I want it to make like logical sense. It just feels very like stilted and very jolty a lot of times with these newer books that are coming out. So with that in mind, I want to talk about like some of my favorite enemies to lovers subplots. First of all, I can't not mention Jude and Carden. I think that Jude and Carden are really, really fun. It is like YA fantasy, but at the same time, like you get that process of Carden thinking like he actively hates Jude so much and this is why he's so fixated on her, but he's spiraling into obsession like over her and almost like respect for just how like evenly matched they are wits-wise, despite the fact that he is like technically above her, especially in like the Fae court. She's just this mortal girl who's like in this Fae world who isn't like a match for him initially. I really think like they're interesting because at the end of the day, despite him being a prince and her just being a mortal, she manages to find a way to be on his level in the end. And so like their progression through the 3 books, it does take like a long time for them to really like admit things to each other, is satisfying. And I think like even at the end, like even at the 3rd book, they still have issues with each other, like they still are bantering with each other, and so I really, really like them. I think there's a good reason why people bring them up when we talk about enemies to lovers. I mean, I love this book series. I don't care. I think it's so much fun. I think it's so cute. And so if like you're looking for a good enemies to lovers and like a YA fantasy kind of Fae book, I think that should be a go-to for anyone. Next, you guys, I seriously need you to listen to me so closely right now. If you are a book person and you like romantic subplots and you have not read Purple Hyacinth yet, oh my god, I'm about to put you on something that is about to change your life as you know it. This is a webtoon and it's free on Webtoon if you get the Webtoon app. It's totally free. I do want to mention, keep in mind it is unfinished, but there's 158 chapters out right now. And so like you still have a lot to get through, and the creator still mentions it and they still intend on coming back. They're just on a leave for chronic pain, so I totally respect that. But Purple Hyacinth is this incredible webtoon that does enemies to lovers in such a unique way. It is about like this girl and she is working for this police department in this kind of like low fantasy type of world. It's like inspired by 1940s aesthetics, but also at the same time Victorian aesthetics. Anyway, she works for the police department and they're like investigating various murders. Like there's this assassin that is taking out these high-powered political people and they're trying to hunt him down. And essentially like she ends up running into the assassin and they have to make an alliance with each other, a begrudging alliance, so they work together. And there's a lot of spying and there's a lot of like espionage and there is murder and there is betrayal. And she has very good reason not to trust this guy. He is very highly dangerous. But like, I mean, outside of just the art in this series being gorgeous with such great lighting and everyone being super hot, and also just like being in a very intriguing political plot line, these characters and the way that this relationship plays out feels so earned, and it's so slow burn. This might be one of the most slow burn pieces of media I've ever taken in. And like just their scenes and the gentle touches and the yearning and the comforting and the distrust and the angst is so delicious. And also both of them are so hot. Oh my god, Kieran is so hot, you guys. Kieran is so hot. And then there's another romantic subplot in this that's also equally super cute. It's like a grumpy sunshine. It is so cute. And I can't recommend this enough. I think even if you're someone like who isn't interested in romance at all, this webtoon stands on 2 feet. This webtoon's main plot is so intriguing. It's so good. It's political intrigue. It's political violence. So good. I love Kieran and Lauren so much, and like I don't even want to give too much away, I'll put like a couple pictures up of like some of their dynamic, but like it just scratches that itch without having to rely on like smut and spice. Another one that I really like, I love the Lark, you guys. I was a Lark girl. I was there when season 1 came out, so you get to watch Bellamy and Clark from The 100, the TV show, have this so slow burn. This is like this is actually infuriatingly slow burn because they didn't actually end up getting together, but it's very clear that there was like romantic subtext in this relationship, so much so that literally the actors ended up getting married before these characters got together. I think like the way that they went from distrusting each other and being full of anger for each other to slowly becoming like can't live without each other and being like king and queen of their little kingdom and relying on each other and respecting each other so much is so satisfying. I really love Bullark. I'm always looking for something that replicates that relationship. So those are just a few of my favorites, but let me know what some of yours are. I am dying to read something that has good slow burn, very earned enemies to lovers, but those are just my kind of like wrapped up thoughts on it for now. I think I could dive into a lot of this a lot more, but I've already talked for like 2 hours straight, so this is gonna be a long video. But let me know what you think about all of this. I just wanted to kind of lay it all out there. I don't think that I'm like authoritative voice on any of this. And let me know if you want me to make an entirely separate video on any of these things I've mentioned. I am kind of curious about stepping out into more of these like more talky videos too, so let me know about that. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.